All right, so let's look at the last part of this chapter, which deals with joints, or also known as articulations. So these are functional junctions between bones. So let's look at the classification of joints. So we have three main joints. We have fibrous joints, cartilaginous joints, and then synovial joints. So let's look at those fibrous joints. A fibrous joint is a type of joint in which two or more bones are joined by connective tissue containing many fibers. So these guys have no real appreciable movements. And so an example of this are sutures. So sutures, they hold cranial bones together. With sutures, there's no movement whatsoever. Another type of fibrous joint is our teeth into either our maxilla or our mandibles. So there's slight amount of movement there. No attempt at trying to have movement though. Okay, now let's move on to cartilaginous joints. If I get there, so let's go to here. Actually, let's go to here. So cartilaginous joints is a type of joint in which two or more bones are joined by cartilage. And so they can be joined by two different kinds of cartilage. One is hyaline cartilage and the other is fiber cartilage. So here we get slight mobility, all right? So here this is the costal cartilage, that's a cartilage between the ribs and the sternum. And so this allows our rib cage to expand and contract. Right here, so that's hyaline cartilage. Here are the intervertebral discs, and those are made out of fiber cartilage, so they allow movement between the vertebrae. All right, so what we typically think of as a joint is, the pubis symphysis is another example of a fiber cartilage. So another example of, so the last group of joints are what we typically think of as joints, and these are synovial joints. All right, so these are freely movable joints. So my fingers, my wrists, my elbows, my shoulders, those are all synovial joints. Okay, so let's look at the general structure of a synovial joint. And so when we look at the general structure of a synovial joint, we have the articular cartilage. So this right here is the articular cartilage, there and there. So this is a thin layer of hyaline cartilage that surrounds the ends of the bone. And so what this does is it prevents, whenever you have a movement there, it prevents a bone from moving against bone. So it protects those bones, okay? And it also reduces friction between those bones, all right? Next is a joint cavity. So right here is the joint cavity. So this is a space filled with synovial fluid, and it's bound by the synovial capsule. So right here is the synovial capsule, all right? The outer layer of that synovial capsule is ligament. The inner layer is synovial membrane. Now, synovial membrane produces synovial fluid. And synovial fluid is found within here. This will move for me instead of writing. So synovial fluid is found within here. And that synovial fluid is a lubricant. So you can kind of think of this like what I talked about before with serous membranes and serous fluid. So the synovial membranes release synovial fluid in here, and that's a lubricant that lubricates us. So when our bones move, we're really reducing the friction a lot. It is so slick in here that when you get this cartilage against that cartilage with synovial fluid in there, it's 40 times slicker than ice against ice. Okay, so next what we can have, so all those things I said before, articular cartilage, joint capsule, joint cavity, synovial fluid, all synovial joints have that, okay? If we go to here showing the knee, we're gonna see some other things that not all synovial joints have. So one is reinforcing ligaments. So these are found on the sides, so you're not even gonna see these. These are ligaments other than those in the joint capsule. So these are found on the sides and also within this. So if you've heard of the anterior cruciate ligament and the posterior cruciate ligament, stuff we'll talk about in lab, those are reinforcing ligaments. Next is the meniscus, so you can see some meniscus right there. These are pads of fiber cartilage for shock absorption. Next are bursa, so you see bursa here, here, and here. All right, so bursa are fluid-filled sacs. They contain synovial fluid. They're lined by synovial membranes. And they do a couple things. They aid in the movement of tendons, and they're also shock displacers, so they spread the shock out, all right? Now, if you have a bunion on your foot, that's due to an enlarged bursa. Okay, let's take a look at types of synovial joints. So we'll have to go back to this picture here, all right? So the first is a ball and socket. So here showing a ball and socket. So here you have a ball-shaped structure on one bone, corresponding to a cup-shaped structure on another bone. Okay, so this is found at our shoulders. It's also found at our hips. Next is ellipsoid. So down here you can see ellipsoid there. Basically one bone ends this way, another bone, these, I don't know why this thing never wants to match up, but has a complementary shape to it. So this is found between the atlas and the occipital condyles of the skull. Next are plane joints. Plane joints are where you have two bones that are flat next to each other. This is found between the vertebrae there. They're also found between the wrists, okay, the wrist bones and the ankle bones. Next is a hinge joint. So this is showing a hinge joint. That's what we see on elbow. It's also what we see on a knee. Next is a pivot joint. So here's a pivot joint around an axis. So we see this between the radius and ulna to get us this movement. We also see it right here on your head to give you that movement. Lastly is the saddle joint. So essentially you have two saddle-shaped bones next to each other. And that's found at the base of the thumb. So it gives a wide range of motion there that our thumb has. All right, let's look at types of synovial movements. So the first is a flexion. A flexion is a decrease in a joint angle. So she's bringing her arm up. That's a flexion there, a decrease in joint angle. When she brings her arm back down, that's an extension. That's an increase in joint angle. A hyperextension is excessive extension of the parts of a joint. Typically, we think of that with injuries. This is showing a flexion and extension again. Okay. Next is, I don't have these in the right order apparently, and I don't have all the pictures. So next is with the foot, a dorsiflexion and plantar flexion. Dorsiflexion is a foot, flexion of the foot upwards towards the body. So when you bring your foot up, so like you take your foot off of the gas, right? That's a dorsiflexion. A plantar flexion is a flexion of the foot downwards away from the body. So when you put your foot on the gas, that's a plantar flexion. This is showing abduction and adduction. So abduction is a movement apart laterally away from the midline. So, I can do this with my arms. That's an abduction. Adduction is a movement apart laterally towards the midline. So bring my arms back down is an adduction. Okay. Next is a rotation, the moving part around an axis. So this is a rotation here. This is a rotation here. All right. Next is a circumduction. That's a movement apart in a wide circle. So if I take my arm and do this, that's a circumduction. A couple of specific types of rotations is a pronation and supination. So a pronation is a rotation of the arm where the palm is down, and a supination is a rotation of the arm where the palm is up. All right. The next two deal with the feet. I don't think I have this picture here. So that's rotation and circumduction. So first is eversion and then inversion. So an eversion is turning the sole so the foot faces laterally. So if you stick your foot out this way, that's an eversion. An inversion is turning the foot so the sole faces medially, so towards the body. So that would be an inversion if it was on the foot. Retraction is a moving apart backwards. So if I take my shoulders and move them back, that's a retraction. Protraction is a moving apart forward. So if I do that, that's a protraction. Elevation is a raising of a body part. So if I bring my shoulders up like that, that's an elevation. Depression is a lowering of a body part. So lowering those shoulders down.